I pulled into my driveway at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday evening, exhausted from 3 days at a marketing conference in Denver. The porch light was off, which struck me as odd since I'd left it on when I departed Monday morning. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the darkness. It was the neat pile of boxes and suitcases arranged on the front steps like some twisted welcome mat. My belongings. Every single item I could recognize from where I sat in the car. My grandmother's quilt draped over one box, my favorite leather jacket hanging from a suitcase handle, even my coffee maker balanced precariously on top of a cardboard container marked kitchen stuff in handwriting that wasn't mine. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, my conference bag still on the passenger seat, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This was my house. The house my parents had bought for me as a wedding gift 5 years ago. The house where I'd planted roses in the front garden, where I'd painted the bedroom walls soft lavender, where I'd hosted Sunday dinners for my husband's family. The house where my mother-in-law, Rosa Martinez, had apparently decided I no longer belonged. I climbed out of my car on unsteady legs and approached the front door. The familiar bronze key I'd carried for 5 years slid into the lock, turned halfway, and stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs as I jiggled the key, twisted it the other way, pulled it out, and tried again. Nothing. The lock had been changed. A note was taped to the door, written in Rosa's distinctive spidery handwriting. Mia, since you're clearly not committed to this family or this marriage, I've taken the liberty of helping you make a clean break. Your things are on the porch. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Rosa. I stared at the note until the words blurred. Not committed to this family? I'd spent the last 3 years bending over backward to please this woman. I'd learned to make her son's favorite meals, attended every family gathering, listened to her criticisms about my career, my clothes, and my inability to give her grandchildren. I'd bitten my tongue when she rearranged my furniture during her visits, when she threw away my spices and replaced them with her own, when she installed herself in my guest room for weeks at a time. And now, because I'd gone to a conference for my job, a conference that could lead to a promotion we desperately needed, she'd decided to evict me from my own home? My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, Diego. Sorry, babe, working late again. Mom's making dinner. See you tomorrow? I called him immediately. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice distracted. Hey, how was the conference? You home? Diego, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Your mother changed the locks on our house. A pause. What do you mean? I mean, I'm standing on our front porch looking at all my possessions in boxes, and my key doesn't work in the lock anymore. Your mother left me a note saying I'm not committed to this family. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear voices in the background, a television playing. Look, she's been upset about you being gone so much. Maybe she doesn't live here, Diego. She can't just change the locks on someone else's house. It's not someone else's house, he said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. It's our house, mine and yours. And if Mom thinks... Actually, I interrupted, surprised by the calm clarity that suddenly filled my voice. It's not our house. It's my house. The deed is in my name only. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. What are you talking about? The house was a gift from my parents to me. When we got married, they put it in my name because they wanted me to have security. I'd never mentioned this detail to Diego. At the time, it had seemed like a technicality, a boring legal matter that didn't affect our daily lives. Now, standing on my porch, surrounded by my exiled belongings, it felt like a lifeline. That's not possible, Diego said finally. I've been living there for 5 years. I pay half the utilities. Check the deed, I said quietly. It's in the file cabinet in the office, under Important Documents. I ended the call and stood in the gathering darkness, my mind racing. The conference had been a success. I'd landed 2 major clients and impressed the senior partners. I'd been flying high on the drive home, already planning how to share the good news with Diego over dinner. Instead, I was effectively homeless, locked out by a woman who had no legal right to be in my house, let alone change the locks. But Rosa had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed, like Diego apparently had, that marriage automatically meant shared ownership. She'd forgotten that some gifts come with strings attached, and sometimes those strings can become lifelines. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my parents' attorney, Janet Morrison. Mom had insisted I keep her number when they transferred the deed. Just in case, she'd said. You never know when you might need someone who understands property law. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now, I realized she'd been protecting me in ways I hadn't understood. Janet answered on the second ring, her voice professionally crisp despite the late hour. Mia, is everything all right? I explained the situation in clipped sentences, trying to keep emotion out of my voice. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or disapproval. Let me get this straight, she said when I finished. You've been away for 3 days on business. You returned to find your belongings packed and placed outside your own home, the locks changed, and a note from your mother-in-law telling you you're not welcome? That's correct. And the house is solely in your name, purchased by your parents as a wedding gift? Yes, I have all the documentation. Well, Janet said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, this should be interesting. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? I'm going to bring some friends. Friends? A locksmith and a sheriff's deputy, just to make sure everyone understands the legal situation clearly. I spent the night at a hotel, lying awake in the generic room, staring at the ceiling and replaying the last 5 years of my marriage. How had I become so invisible in my own life? When had I started accepting Rosa's authority over decisions that weren't hers to make? The answer came to me around 3 a.m., floating up from memories I'd tried to suppress. It had started small, as these things always do. Rosa commented that I worked too much, that a good wife should be home when her husband returned from work. Rosa rearranged my kitchen to be more efficient, throwing away my favorite coffee mug because it didn't match her preferred color scheme. Rosa scheduled family dinners during times I'd already committed to work events, then making pointed comments about my priorities when I couldn't attend. And Diego? Diego had become an expert at phrases like, you know how mom is, and just let it go, and family is important. He'd mastered the art of making me feel unreasonable for objecting to his mother's increasingly bold intrusions into our lives. But I'd gone along with it, hadn't I? I'd absorbed her criticisms, adjusted my schedule around her preferences, bitten my tongue when she undermined me in front of Diego. I'd told myself I was being mature, keeping the peace, building bridges. What I'd actually been doing was teaching them both that my boundaries were negotiable. Well, they were about to learn the difference between legal boundaries and personal ones. I arrived at the house at 8:45 a.m. to find Diego's truck in the driveway and the curtains drawn tight. My boxes had been moved to the side of the porch, but they were still there, a physical reminder of my exile. I sat in my car, waiting for Janet, when the front door opened. Rosa emerged first, her gray hair perfectly styled, wearing her favorite navy dress, the one she always wore when she wanted to look authoritative. She surveyed the street with the satisfaction of a general reviewing her troops. Behind her came Diego, looking rumpled and uncomfortable. They were talking in low, urgent voices, but I could catch fragments through my open car window. Told her not to make a scene, Rosa was saying. Not sure this is the right way to handle it, Diego replied. The girl needs to learn respect, Rosa declared, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Marriage is about sacrifice, about putting family first. If she can't understand that, then she doesn't deserve to be part of this family. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest, clean and sharp as a blade. The girl. She was talking about me like I was an unruly teenager, rather than a 32-year-old woman with a successful career and legal ownership of the house she was occupying. A white sedan pulled up behind my car, and Janet stepped out, her silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. She was followed by a man in coveralls carrying a toolbox, the locksmith, I assumed, and a woman in a sheriff's uniform. "Good morning, Mia," Janet said, her voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "I trust you slept well?" Rosa's head snapped toward us, her eyes narrowing as she took in the small procession approaching her front porch. Because that's how she was thinking of it, I realized. Her front porch, her house, her domain to control. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Janet continued, addressing Rosa directly, "I'm Janet Morrison, attorney for the property owner. I believe there's been some confusion about the legal status of this residence." Rosa lifted her chin, a gesture I'd seen her use countless times when she felt challenged. "There's no confusion. This is my son's home. I have every right to be here." "Actually," Janet said, pulling a manila folder from her briefcase, "this is Mia Herrera. She is the sole owner of this property, as documented in these legal records filed with the county." She handed Rosa a copy of the deed. I watched Rosa's face as she scanned the document. Her confident expression gradually shifted to confusion, then disbelief, then something approaching panic. "This can't be right," she said, looking from the papers to Diego, who was studying his shoes with intense concentration. "Diego, you told me you owned this house." "I thought I did," he mumbled, still not meeting anyone's eyes. "I mean, we're married, so I assumed." "Assumption," the sheriff's deputy said pleasantly, "is not the same as legal ownership. Ma'am, you've changed the locks on a property you don't own and placed the owner's belongings outside. That constitutes illegal eviction and trespassing." Rosa's carefully constructed authority crumbled visibly. "But I'm family. This is my son's wife. There must be some mistake." "The only mistake," I said, stepping forward for the first time, "was assuming you had the right to make decisions about my property without my consent." For a moment, Rosa looked genuinely shocked, as though she'd forgotten I could speak for myself. In her world, I realized, I'd become a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. "You can't do this," she said, her voice rising. "I won't be thrown out like some stranger. I'm family." "Family," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "doesn't lock family out of their own home." The locksmith stepped forward, his toolbox in hand. "Ma'am, I need to restore access to the legal owner. This will take about 10 minutes. "You can't just change the locks back," Rosa protested. "My things are in there, my medications, my clothes." "You have 30 minutes to gather your personal belongings," the deputy said, consulting her watch. "After that, you'll need to make arrangements to retrieve anything you've left behind." I watched Rosa's face cycle through emotions: anger, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like respect. For the first time since I'd known her, she was seeing me as an opponent rather than an obstacle. "Diego," she said sharply, turning to her son, "say something. This is your wife, your home." Diego looked up from his shoes, his face pale and conflicted. "Mom, maybe we should just..." "Just what? Let her throw me out? Let her destroy this family?" "Nobody's destroying anything," I said quietly. "I'm simply reclaiming what was always mine." The locksmith's drill whirred to life, drowning out Rosa's protests. I watched him work, methodically removing the lock she'd installed and replacing it with a new one. When he handed me the keys, they felt heavier than they should have, weighted with significance I was only beginning to understand. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the deputy said, "you have 25 minutes." Rosa stormed into the house, Diego trailing behind her like a reluctant shadow. Through the open door, I could hear her moving around inside, opening and closing drawers, her voice a constant stream of Spanish, punctuated by English phrases I chose not to translate. "You handled that well," Janet said, joining me on the porch. "Many people would have been more emotional." "I'm furious," I admitted, "but I've learned that anger is more effective when it's focused." "Where did you learn that?" "I thought about it. From watching her, actually. Rosa's most effective when she's cold and calculating. The difference is, I have the law on my side. Janet smiled. Speaking of which, what are your plans for the immediate future? Your husband seems to be in a difficult position. That was an understatement. Diego emerged from the house carrying a suitcase, his face a mask of misery. He approached me hesitantly, like someone approaching a snake that might or might not be venomous. Mia, can we talk? I glanced at Janet, who nodded and moved a discreet distance away. What do you want to say? I didn't know, he began, about the deed, about Mom changing the locks. I came home from work yesterday and she said you'd called and asked her to pack your things because you were leaving me. I stared at him. And you believed that? She showed me your conference materials, said you'd been planning this for months, using the conference as an excuse to start a new life. His voice was barely audible. I thought maybe you'd finally gotten tired of all the family drama. So instead of calling me, instead of asking me directly, you just accepted that I'd abandoned our marriage and our home without a word? He had the grace to look ashamed. She was so certain, and you have been working more, traveling more. I thought maybe. Maybe what? That I'd gotten tired of being treated like an intruder in my own home? Rosa appeared in the doorway, her purse clutched in one hand, a small suitcase in the other. Her careful composure had been replaced by barely controlled fury. This isn't over, she said, directing her words at me. You think you can just cut family out of your life? You think you can turn my son against me? I haven't turned anyone against anyone, I replied. I've simply stopped allowing you to make decisions about my life and my property. 20 minutes, the deputy announced. Rosa's gaze shifted between Diego and me, calculating. You'll regret this, she said finally. Family is everything. Without family, you have nothing. I have my house, I said simply. It's a start. After Rosa left, dragging her suitcase toward a taxi she'd called, Diego and I stood in the sudden quiet of the front yard. The locksmith and deputy had departed, leaving us alone with the wreckage of whatever we'd been pretending our marriage was. What happens now? Diego asked. I looked at him, this man I'd shared a bed with for 5 years, and realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the romantic partner I'd hoped he'd become, but as the person he actually was. Someone who would believe his mother's lies rather than trust his wife's word. Someone who would allow his family to lock his spouse out of her own home rather than defend her boundaries. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know what doesn't happen. Your mother doesn't get to treat my home like her personal property. She doesn't get to make decisions about my life. And you don't get to stand by and let her do it. She's my mother, Mia. She raised me by herself after Dad died. She sacrificed everything for me. And you think that gives her the right to sacrifice me? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I walked up the porch steps and unlocked my front door with my new key. The house smelled like Rosa's perfume and disapproval, but it was mine. The furniture had been rearranged, my personal photos removed from their frames, and replaced with pictures of Diego's extended family. My coffee mug, the one Rosa had once criticized, was nowhere to be seen. But it was my house, my sanctuary, my space to control. I spent the rest of the day methodically undoing Rosa's changes. I moved furniture back to its original positions, returned my photographs to bare frames, and threw away the harsh cleaning products she'd stocked in my laundry room. In the master bedroom, I found evidence of her extended stay. Prescription bottles on the nightstand, her clothes in my closet, her hair products cluttering my bathroom counter. She'd been planning to stay permanently, I realized. The lock change hadn't been a spontaneous act of anger. It had been the final step in a calculated takeover. Diego returned that evening, his key working in the lock once again. He found me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea and my laptop. I've been thinking, he said, settling into the chair across from me. Maybe we can work this out. Set some boundaries with Mom. Make sure she understands this is our space. I looked up from my screen. Where is she staying? With my Aunt Carmen, temporarily. And after temporarily? He shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. She doesn't have a lot of options. That's not my problem anymore. Mia, she's family. We can't just abandon her. We? I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. Diego, your mother physically removed me from my own home. She changed my locks, packed my belongings, and tried to convince you I'd abandoned our marriage. There is no we when it comes to your mother. There's you, and there's me, and there's the choice you need to make between us. Why does it have to be a choice? Because she made it one. Because you let her make it one. Over the following weeks, Diego tried to rebuild what had been broken. He bought flowers, cooked dinner, and suggested weekend trips to places we'd visited when we were dating. But underneath his efforts, I could sense his resentment. He was going through the motions of being a devoted husband while secretly believing I'd overreacted to his mother's concern. The breaking point came 3 weeks later when I returned from work to find Rosa sitting in my living room. "How did you get in?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Diego gave me his key," she said, settling back into my couch as though she belonged there. "We need to talk." I pulled out my phone and called Diego. He answered on the first ring, his voice bright with forced cheer. "Hey babe, how was your day?" "Your mother is in my house." A pause. "She just wanted to talk to you, to apologize and clear the air." "She's not welcome here." "Mia, she's trying to make peace. Can't you at least listen to what she has to say?" I looked at Rosa, who was watching me with the patient expression of someone who knew she held the winning hand. "No," I said, and hung up. "You're making a mistake," Rosa said calmly. "Diego will always choose family over everything else. It's how I raised him." "Then you raised him wrong." Her composure cracked slightly. "I raised him to understand loyalty, to understand that family comes first, always. You're just someone who happened to marry him. You can be replaced. Get out of my house." "This could have been easy," she continued, standing slowly. "You could have been part of the family, but you choose to be selfish, to put your career and your independence above what matters. Now you'll learn what it costs to stand alone." After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about her words. Rosa was right about one thing. Diego would always choose family over everything else. But she was wrong about another. I wouldn't be standing alone. I'd be standing as myself, finally, for the first time in years. When Diego came home that night, I was waiting for him in the living room with a manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked, settling into the armchair across from me. "Divorce papers." The color drained from his face. "Mia, let's not be hasty. We can work through this. Your mother was in my house today. You gave her a key to my house without asking me. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to threaten me. She told me I could be replaced." Diego's shoulders sagged. "She didn't mean it like that." "How?" He couldn't answer, because we both knew exactly how she'd meant it. "I won't live like this," I said quietly. "I won't spend the rest of my life fighting for basic respect in my own home. I won't be managed and manipulated and told I'm selfish for wanting boundaries. What about our marriage? What about love? What about it? You love your mother more than you love me. You trust her word over mine. You prioritize her comfort over my safety and security. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Diego, your mother locked me out of my own house. She tried to convince you I'd abandoned our marriage. She moved into my bedroom and rearranged my life to suit her preferences. And when I defended myself, you made me feel like I was being unreasonable. I never said you were unreasonable. You didn't have to. Every time you said, 'You know how mom is,' or 'just let it go,' you were telling me that her behavior was acceptable and my objections weren't." We talked for another hour, circling the same arguments, neither of us willing to concede ground. Finally, Diego gathered his things and left to stay with his aunt, promising to think about everything I'd said. But I already knew what he'd decide. Rosa had been right about how she'd raised him. He would always choose family, and in his mind, I had forfeited my place in that family by refusing to be controlled. The divorce was surprisingly straightforward. Diego didn't contest my ownership of the house, though I suspect Rosa encouraged him to fight for it. Perhaps Janet's documentation had been too thorough, or perhaps he'd finally understood that some battles aren't worth fighting. I kept the house, my career, and my independence. Diego kept his mother's approval and his family's unity. We both got what we'd chosen, though I wondered if either of us had fully understood the cost. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up in front of my house. Diego got out, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He approached the fence hesitantly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hi," he said. "Hi. The house looks good. The roses are beautiful. Thank you." We stood there for a moment, separated by the fence I'd installed along the property line. It was a physical boundary that matched the emotional ones I'd learned to maintain. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for everything, for not standing up for you, for not believing you, for letting things get so out of hand." I studied his face, looking for signs of the man I'd once thought I'd spent my life with. He seemed genuine, but there was something rehearsed about his words, as though he'd practiced them. "Is Rosa here?" I asked. He looked surprised. "No, she's at Carmen's. Why?" "Because this feels like something she'd orchestrate. The humble apology, the admission of wrongdoing, the attempt to make me feel guilty for not giving you another chance. She doesn't know I'm here. But she knows you're thinking about it. She knows you miss the house, miss the stability, miss having someone to manage the domestic side of your life while she handles the emotional manipulation." His face flushed. "That's not fair. Isn't it? Diego, you're here because your new living situation isn't working out. You're here because you've realized that having a wife who owns her own house is convenient. You're not here because you've learned to set boundaries with your mother, or because you've developed respect for my autonomy. I have learned. Where is Rosa living now?" The question stopped him mid-sentence. "With Carmen, I told you that. And how long is she planning to stay there? It's complicated. Carmen's husband isn't thrilled about the arrangement, and Mom's been having health issues. So you're looking for a solution, and you remembered that I have a big house with a guest room, and maybe if you apologize pretty enough, I'll take you both back." It's not like that. But his expression told me it was exactly like that. Rosa had probably spent months working on him, pointing out how much better his life had been when he was married to me, how unreasonable I'd been to break up the family over such a small misunderstanding. "I'm not your solution, Diego. I'm not Rosa's solution. I'm a person who learned to value herself enough to demand respect. I do respect you." "No, you don't. You respect the idea of me, the convenience of me, the financial security I represented, but you don't respect me as an individual with the right to make decisions about my own life and property." I turned to go back into the house, then paused. "Tell Rosa I said hello, and tell her the locks work perfectly." I didn't see Diego again for several months. Through mutual friends, I heard that Rosa had moved in with him and Carmen, creating exactly the kind of tension and drama she seemed to thrive on. Carmen's marriage had suffered, family gatherings had become minefields, and Diego had developed what people politely called stress-related health issues. But that was their story to write. Mine was finally my own. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, earning the promotion I'd been working toward for years. I traveled to conferences without worrying about who would be angry about my absence. I redecorated my house according to my own tastes, filling it with books and art and plants that made me happy. On weekends, I hosted dinners for friends, something I'd rarely done during my marriage because Rosa had always criticized my cooking or my guest list or my timing. Now, my dining room filled with laughter and conversation, with people who appreciated my hospitality instead of finding fault with it. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a particularly successful dinner party, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Mia Herrera?" The voice was elderly, female, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm Diego's grandmother, Rosa's mother." I nearly dropped the phone. In 5 years of marriage, I'd met Elena exactly twice, both times at large family gatherings where she'd sat quietly in the corner, observing everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I'm sorry to call so late," she continued, "but I wanted to speak with you before I lost my nerve." "About what?" "About my daughter and my grandson, about the mess they've made of everything." I sank into a chair, curiosity overcoming caution. "I'm listening." "I know what Rosa did to you, changing the locks, throwing you out of your own home. It was wrong, and I told her so." "You did?" "I told her many things, that she was destroying her son's marriage, that she was becoming the kind of person she'd once criticized, that she was forgetting the difference between being a mother and being a manipulator." I didn't know what to say. In my experience, Rosa's family always supported her unconditionally. "She didn't listen, of course," Elena continued. "Rosa has never been good at listening to things she doesn't want to hear. But I want you to know that not everyone in this family approved of what she did." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Diego came to see me yesterday. He's miserable, Mia. Living with Rosa is destroying him, just like it destroyed his marriage. He asked me to call you, to see if there was any chance you might consider reconciliation." My heart sank. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I appreciate you calling, but—" "Oh, I told him no. That surprised me." "You did?" "I told him he had his chance to choose between his wife and his mother, and he chose wrong. I told him that a man who won't defend his wife doesn't deserve to have one." I found myself smiling for the first time since the conversation began. "What did he say?" "He cried. My grandson, 34 years old, cried like a little boy. But sometimes that's what it takes." "Is that why you're calling? To tell me Diego is sorry?" "No, Mia. I'm calling to tell you that you did the right thing. Not just with the house, but with everything. Rosa raised that boy to think the world revolves around family loyalty, but she forgot to teach him that loyalty goes both ways." We talked for another 20 minutes. Elena told me stories about Rosa's childhood, about the losses and disappointments that had shaped her into someone who hoarded love like a finite resource. She spoke about Diego's father, who had died when Diego was 12, leaving Rosa to raise him alone with a fierce protectiveness that had eventually become possessiveness. "She's not evil," Elena said as our conversation wound down. "She's scared of being alone, scared of losing the only person who still needs her. But fear isn't an excuse for cruelty. No, it's not. You take care of yourself, Mia, and don't let anyone convince you that standing up for yourself was wrong." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, thinking about family and loyalty and the difference between love and control. Elena had given me something I hadn't realized I needed: validation from someone who understood the family dynamics better than I ever could. I never heard from Diego again directly, though I occasionally caught glimpses of their ongoing drama through mutual friends. Rosa had eventually worn out her welcome at Carmen's and moved in with another relative. Diego had started therapy, supposedly, though whether he was addressing his mother's issues or just learning to manage his stress was unclear. 6 months later, I heard through the grapevine that Rosa had suffered a minor heart attack. Diego had moved her into his apartment, becoming her full-time caregiver. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had spent years manipulating situations to ensure she'd never be alone had ended up exactly where she'd started, dependent on her son for everything. But that was their choice, their pattern, their lesson to learn or not learn. Meanwhile, I was building something different. I'd started dating again, taking things slowly, learning to recognize the difference between someone who respected my boundaries and someone who saw them as challenges to overcome. I'd made new friends through work and hobbies, people who appreciated my company without expecting me to diminish myself to make them comfortable. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment. The woman who had stood paralyzed on her porch, staring at her belongings in boxes, had been someone who doubted her right to her own space, her own voice, her own standards. The woman I was becoming knew exactly what she was worth and what she wouldn't accept. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I decided to host a housewarming party. Not because I'd just moved in, I'd been living there for 6 years, but because I was finally living there as myself, surrounded by things I'd chosen, people I'd invited, boundaries I'd established and maintained. The party was everything I'd hoped it would be. My house was filled with laughter and conversation, with friends from different parts of my life who all seemed to enjoy each other's company. We ate food I'd prepared without criticism, drank wine I'd selected without consultation, and celebrated life as it was rather than as someone else thought it should be. As the evening wound down and the last guests were leaving, I stood on my front porch, looking out at the street where so much had changed. The rose garden was blooming magnificently, the result of patient care and attention. The new fence created a clear boundary between my property and the world beyond, welcoming friends while keeping out those who might cause harm. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Saw the party photos on social media. Holly would be proud of how you've transformed her old neighborhood. Hope you're as happy as you look. I smiled, thinking of Holly and her final letter, her instruction to forgive no one, let them beg, and walk away. Different circumstances, same lesson. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is refusing to negotiate away your own worth. I locked my front door with the key I'd earned through standing my ground, through refusing to accept treatment that diminished me, through choosing my own peace over other people's comfort. The house settled around me, quiet and secure, a sanctuary I'd defended and could defend again if necessary. In the morning, I'd wake up in my own bed, in my own room, in my own home. I'd make coffee in my kitchen, tend my garden, go to my job, live my life according to my own values and standards. No one would rearrange my furniture or throw away my belongings or tell me I was being unreasonable for wanting basic respect. I'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between family and people who happened to share your DNA, between love and control disguised as concern. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most profound act of love, for yourself and others, is knowing when to walk away. The house was mine now in every sense that mattered, not just legally, but emotionally, spiritually. Every room reflected choices I'd made without seeking approval or permission. The kitchen held appliances I'd selected, spices I'd chosen, and dishes that pleased my eye rather than conforming to someone else's aesthetic. The living room furniture faced the windows I wanted to look out of, arranged for conversations I wanted to have with people I genuinely enjoyed. But perhaps the most significant change was in the guest room, the space Rosa had once claimed as her own during her extended stays. I'd transformed it into my home office, with built-in bookshelves, a desk positioned to catch the morning light, and walls painted a soft sage green that made me feel calm and focused. Where Rosa had once sorted through my mail and rearranged my belongings, I now wrote reports, planned presentations, and built the career that had always threatened her vision of what a wife should be. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The room that had once housed my antagonist now housed my ambitions. 2 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my garden on a Saturday morning when a taxi pulled up in front of my house. Elena Rodriguez stepped out carefully, using a walker, but moving with determined dignity. She was smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence I'd noticed at family gatherings. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said, straightening up from my roses, "this is a surprise." "I hope it's not an unwelcome one," she replied, approaching my front gate. "I was hoping we could talk." I invited her in, settling her in my living room with tea and the small cookies I'd learned to make from my grandmother's recipe. Elena looked around the space with interest, taking in the changes I'd made since she'd last heard about the house through family gossip. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "It looks like you." "Thank you. How are Diego and Rosa?" Elena's expression grew complicated. "That's part of why I'm here. Rosa had another heart episode last month, more serious this time. She's different now, Quieter. She spends a lot of time thinking about things, choices she's made. I waited, sensing there was more. She asked me to come see you, Elena continued. Not to apologize, she knows it's too late for that, but to tell you something she thinks you should know. What's that? She's proud of you. I nearly dropped my teacup. I'm sorry. She said to tell you that what you did, standing up to her, protecting your home, refusing to back down, it reminded her of herself at your age, before she became so afraid of losing people that she forgot how to love them properly. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. Rosa proud of me? Rosa acknowledging that her behavior had been wrong? She also wanted you to know that she never told Diego the whole truth about that week you were at the conference. What do you mean? Elena sighed, looking older than her years. Diego didn't come home to find your things packed and a story about you leaving him. Rosa packed your things herself, changed the locks herself, and then told Diego that you'd called and asked her to do it. She showed him your conference materials as proof that you were planning to start over somewhere else. The betrayal was even deeper than I'd realized. He believed her. He wanted to believe her. It was easier than admitting his mother was capable of such manipulation. But she told him the truth last month when she thought she might not survive the heart attack. She wanted to clear her conscience. How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. He's been carrying guilt about not fighting for your marriage, not calling you that week to confirm what his mother had told him. Now he knows there was nothing to confirm. It was all lies. I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, anger, and, surprisingly, pity. For Diego, who had discovered that his foundation of trust was built on lies. For Rosa, who had destroyed relationships to avoid the very abandonment she feared most. Even for myself, for all the years I'd spent doubting my own perceptions and reactions. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Rosa wanted you to know that you were right about everything. The boundaries you tried to set, the respect you demanded, the choice you gave Diego between his wife and his mother's manipulation. You were right, and she was wrong, and she wanted that acknowledged." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I took the envelope with trembling fingers, recognizing Rosa's handwriting on the outside. For Mia, the daughter-in-law who was stronger than I was. Inside was a short letter, written in Rosa's careful script. "Mia, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. What I did to you was unforgivable, born out of my own fears and selfishness. I told myself I was protecting my son, but I was really protecting myself from the possibility of being alone. You showed me what strength looks like, real strength, not the controlling kind I mistook for power. You didn't let fear make you cruel, the way I did. You chose your dignity over keeping the peace, your truth over comfortable lies. I destroyed my son's marriage to a woman who was exactly what he needed, and I did it because I was too afraid to trust that there was room in his life for both of us. Now I live with him out of necessity rather than choice, and he cares for me out of duty rather than love. We are both paying the price for my selfishness. I hope you have found happiness. I hope you have found someone who deserves you and defends you the way Diego should have. I hope you know that you were never the problem, I was. With regret and respect, Rosa Martinez." I read the letter twice, then set it aside. The validation was meaningful, but it also felt like too little, too late. Rosa's acknowledgement couldn't undo the years of manipulation, the damage to my marriage, or the pain of discovering that my husband would believe his mother's lies over his wife's word. "She's dying, isn't she?" I asked quietly. "We all are, mija, but yes, more quickly than most. The doctors give her maybe 6 months. And Diego is learning what it means to be truly alone with someone. She needs constant care now, but the woman he's caring for isn't the strong, opinionated mother he remembers. She's fragile and regretful and completely dependent on him. It's not the relationship either of them wanted." After Elena left, I sat with Rosa's letter for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and justice and the strange ways that life sometimes balances the scales. Rosa had gotten exactly what she'd fought so hard to achieve, her son's undivided attention, but it had come at the cost of everything that made the relationship meaningful. Diego had chosen his mother over his wife, just as Rosa had trained him to do, but now he was discovering that winning that battle had cost him the war for his own happiness. And I had lost a marriage I'd tried to save, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could trust my own judgment, defend my own boundaries, and build a life that reflected my values rather than someone else's fears. 3 months later, Elena called to tell me that Rosa had passed away in her sleep. The funeral was large, filled with extended family and friends who remembered her as the strong, devoted mother, rather than the manipulative woman she'd become in her final years. Diego gave a eulogy about sacrifice and family loyalty that sounded hollow to anyone who knew the real story. I didn't attend the funeral, but I did send flowers with a card that simply read, "With understanding and peace." 6 months after Rosa's death, I was surprised to find Diego waiting by my garden gate when I came home from work. He looked terrible, thin, exhausted, carrying the weight of caregiving and grief and delayed understanding. "Hi," he said, the same greeting he'd used during his previous visit. "Hi, I heard about your mother. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. I got your flowers. That was kind of you." We stood there awkwardly, separated by the fence and by everything that had happened between us. "I know the truth now," he said finally, "about the conference, about the locks, about what she told me that week. Elena said she gave you Mom's letter. She did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost, what I threw away. Not just you, but my own integrity, my own ability to think for myself." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found only genuine remorse and exhaustion. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know. Try to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of someone else or being managed by someone else. Maybe learn to make decisions based on what I think is right, instead of what keeps the peace." "That's good. You should do that." "The house is beautiful," he said, echoing his mother's words from Elena's visit. "It was always special. I just had to learn to see it that way." We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, paperwork that needed to be sorted out, possessions of mine that Rosa had kept over the years. But underneath the mundane conversation was the recognition that we were truly strangers now, connected only by a shared history that neither of us could change. As he prepared to leave, Diego turned back one more time. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd chosen differently that day? If I'd believed you instead of her?" I considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but then I remember that the choice itself revealed something fundamental about who you were, who we were as a couple. If you'd chosen differently in that moment, something else would have tested us eventually. The problem wasn't one decision, it was a pattern of decisions, a way of being in the world. "You're probably right," he smiled sadly. "You usually were." After he left, I went inside my house and made myself dinner, ate it at my kitchen table while reading a book I'd chosen from my own shelves. Later, I called a friend to make plans for the weekend, watered my plants, and settled into my evening routine. It was a quiet life, some might say, peaceful, predictable, but it was mine, shaped by my choices, my values, my vision of what home should feel like. 3 years later, I met James at a conference, ironically, the same annual marketing conference that had precipitated my divorce. He was funny, intelligent, and most importantly, he understood boundaries as protection rather than rejection. When I told him about my house, about the locks and a deed, and the choice I'd made to defend my space, he nodded with understanding rather than judgment. "Good for you," he said simply. "Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home." We dated slowly, carefully, both of us carrying wisdom earned through previous relationships that had taught us the difference between love and possession. When he eventually moved in with me, it was after months of conversations about expectations, boundaries, and the kind of life we wanted to build together. James brought his own furniture, his own dishes, his own vision of what our shared space could become. We negotiated, compromised, and created something new that honored both of our needs and preferences. When his elderly father needed temporary care after a surgery, we discussed it openly, made decisions together, and set clear limits on duration and expectations. It was everything my marriage to Diego had never been: partnership instead of power struggle, negotiation instead of manipulation, respect instead of control disguised as love. On our wedding day, I wore my grandmother's dress and carried roses from my own garden. Elena Rodriguez, now in her 90s but still sharp as a tack, sent a congratulatory card that made me cry. "Mija, you found someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. I'm so proud of the woman you became." The reception was held in my backyard, under string lights we'd hung together, surrounded by friends who had watched me rebuild my life from the ground up. James's family blended seamlessly with my chosen family of friends and colleagues and neighbors who had become dear to me over the years. As we danced to our first song as husband and wife, James whispered in my ear, "Thank you for not settling for less than you deserved. It made room for us." I looked around at my garden, my house, my life, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not the brittle satisfaction of winning a battle, but the warm satisfaction of building something genuine and lasting. The woman who had stood on her porch 5 years earlier, staring at her belongings in boxes, had been lost and confused and desperate to please. The woman dancing in her own backyard, surrounded by people who loved and respected her, knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones that teach us we're worth fighting for. Sometimes the most profound victory is learning to love ourselves enough to demand that others treat us with the respect we deserve. I had changed the deed back to my name, but more importantly, I had reclaimed ownership of my own life. The locks had been just the beginning. In the end, Rosa had been right about one thing: family is everything. But she had been wrong about what family means. Family isn't people who control you out of fear of losing you. Family isn't people who demand you sacrifice your integrity to keep the peace. Family isn't people who punish you for having boundaries or dreams or opinions of your own. Family is people who want you to grow, who celebrate your strength, who trust your judgment even when it's different from theirs. Family is people who show up for you without expecting you to diminish yourself in return. Family is people who love you enough to let you be yourself, fully and completely, without reservation or condition. I had found my real family, and they were dancing in my garden, eating food I had prepared without criticism, celebrating a love I had built without compromise. The house that had once been a battleground was now a sanctuary, not because I had won a war, but because I had learned the difference between fighting for something and fighting to protect something. The deed was in my name, but more importantly, so was my life.